Hello, my name is JC. Thanks for watching this video. I'm going to be going over some fun and easy techniques, and this is going to be a series devoted just to terracotta or earth clay or just natural modeling clay, depending on the regionalism. This clay is also called ceramic when you can bake it in a kiln, very high temperatures, and turn it into the consistency of pottery. But until it's been baked, it stays this either wet or this air-dried version of the clay that has some different properties, and we're going to go over all of that. This series is really designed for anybody of any age, but I'm going to make sure that it's kid-friendly, but I'm not checking the made for kids box because I don't know, it feels weird. But so I'm not really making this for kids only. So this is really for everybody. But I want to stress that it will be, kept safe. So I'm really doing this for my nieces and nephews. My kids are all big now, but I did do things like this with them when they were little, and for different elementary schools while they were attending. So this is going to be an ongoing series. We're going to do some fun little cartoon characters, maybe some monsters like this, and some practical lessons and study. But also, just talking about the kind of clay and what you can do with it. So we might as well get started with what materials you'll need. So the main type of clay is this natural modeling clay, and this can be picked up at a dollar store. Up here it's $1.50. I'm pretty sure it's probably $1 in the States. In other regions, probably about that price. Now you may notice that some of them they have an inner bag inside there that's supposed to be airtight, but occasionally one like this will get pretty stiff, where normally it should be bendy like this, have some kind of squish to it. You'll feel it's somewhat cold to the touch. That's when this clay from the ground, comes out and is moldable. And so it's used for pottery and any kind of terracotta thing like this. Even these nativity dolls that I've been working on. So I may even make a few things like that. But for now, we're just going to do some fun and quick exercises. Try to keep these lessons somewhat short for people with short attention spans. And so the product you need is any kind of earth clay like this. It can be as long as it's mixed with water, and the cool thing about it is it can be reclaimed. So the other thing you definitely need is some water handy. It will make a little bit of a mess, so I recommend you have either a plastic tablecloth or some kind of table that is easily cleaned with water. I wouldn't do it on any kind of natural wood or a wood table that needs, that can be damaged by water, for sure. And the other cool thing about this clay is it can be reclaimed. So this is some older pieces from this other series I did privately, and I just put the pieces in a jar with some water, and they eventually soak up the water and turn back into the perfect consistency for modeling clay. So that's really it. The only tools I'm going to be using are just some basic stuff. Maybe keep a couple brushes handy, but really just this one set of 3. And they're pretty easy to find. It's a set of shapers, which means this rubber tips on one side and these nice metal spheres on the other side of various sizes. And that's really all you need. The rest of it's going to be all done by hand. And yeah, I mean, really, there's a lot you can do with just your fingers. So I'm going to try to focus on that and just make this fun and easy for people of any age, really. But so let's get started. Oh, one thing to keep in mind, this clay is very brittle. As you can see, these fingers had already broken off and weren't really attached. So unless you're going to bake it, be aware that it's not going to survive too long, especially if there's a little breakable piece like that. But this clay, again, like I said, is super easy to reclaim by putting it in a jar, and I'll do that with this in a minute. But It also teaches you some detachment in a healthy way, I think. This clay is so easy and cheap to use that you know, just being able to make a bunch of things and not having to keep them all is a good exercise. I kept some of these fun things. I was trying to do a little fun little Buddha cat and whatever. This is just a dumb example of a little cartoon monster, looking online for something cartoony and monstery. So things like that. We will make some animals, we'll make some fun little projects, and yeah, let's get started. So I'm going to start by taking a look inside this jar and seeing how good this old clay is. See if there's much to do in this. It looks pretty good consistency wise. Oh yeah, look at that. It's not too wet. The thing that you don't want is it to be too wet. As if it's super wet and sticky, it can be like this. It can be hard to model without getting it all over yourself or the table. So I'm going to save this. This is definitely a little too wet for what I want to do right now, but I'll save it and keep it handy, maybe even with the lid off so that it dries out a little bit. And we can use that for what's called slip. If you want to join two pieces together, having a slightly wetter consistency like this is good to have on the side. So having a small container or a jar like this with some slip is also very common and necessary in certain kinds of pottery. So, and this is an older piece that was already opened. I tried to keep it somewhat airtight, but unless you really seal it completely, you know, it will eventually dry out and stiffen up. But again, the good news is I can use this. It's actually got some flexibility still, and that's been sitting for months like that, just wrapped up with plastic. It's actually got a pretty good dryness to it, as you can see when you smush it. That's actually pretty good. So I'll keep that handy, but also I may dip into this new batch here, and there'll be lots of crumbs, lots of dust. So I don't recommend doing this by your computer or on a table where there are sensitive electronics. Just keep a nice area that can be made messy, and you should be good to go. So let's give this a try. Let's make some fun little shapes. I'll try some simple lesson to start, and then I'll try to do one of these as often as I can. Keep it going. You may also want a little platform like this for either final placement. Makes things easy to move. So I recommend something like this. These are also at the dollar stores. They come in different shapes, but very reasonable to be able to stick something on, pick it up, move it to a shelf for safe drying. These sat on the shelf for a few weeks, and then they turn this much lighter color and get to be what's called bone dry. This is quite solid. I would not bake this in an oven or a kiln because it's very solid. Normally you're making this kind of object, even like these little dolls. You notice there's a hole in the bottom, and the inside's actually quite hollow. It's not a very thick shell like this. So if you are going to put them in a kiln, definitely don't have solid chunks like this. They can have air pockets and explode, and you don't want to damage other people's pottery. And somebody who owns a kiln is curing or baking other things. They're not gonna want to put solid pieces in it next to their pots. So yeah, let's just dive in and get started, see what happens. So the annoying thing here is going to be the dry, crumbly bits. But having a little water handy, like I said, is what's really going to make this possible to do things with. You can dip your fingers in it. Let me get over here. You can dip your fingers in it like that, and then when you rub it on the clay, you'll see that it changes the consistency of the surface, making it very smooth or a little slippery. But it doesn't take long for that water to soak in and dry out. But you see how you can change the property of that surface very quickly. And it will start to stick, but again, you're always going to be battling with different levels of wetness when you're doing this. And when you're working on giant pieces, you know, there's people who have spray bottles also handy. which can keep the surface wet for longer periods of time. So that can also be useful, but not saying you have to do that. All right, let's get this shrunken down so you can see closer what I'm doing. And yeah, we'll just get started on something. So this is going to be a real simple, easy lesson. I'm going to just start with a simple little bug shape, as everybody knows well. So you need a piece of clay about that big. This is maybe 1 inch and a bit, maybe 1.5 inches by 3-4 inches. And depending on how dry it is, you'll notice that when you try to merge it together or roll it up, you'll end up with either a nice smoothness or a cracking. If it starts to crack, it's too dry. If you can bend it back and forth and it's a little flexible and not cracking, that's probably just about right. So that means it won't stick to the table, it won't stick to your hands. As you can see, it's not sticking to my hands, but it is transferring some water. And that water will dry out eventually, and we'll have to deal with the change in the way the clay works. So what we're going to do is roll out a simple snake shape. If it's not rolling too well, you can also do with your fingers, and the goal is to try to make it get consistently smaller as it goes from one end to the other. You want to try to roll it out so you get as long as you can on your table. I don't have too much room here, but I'm going to try. Yeah, this is going to get reclaimed. So I think I'm just going to take some of the clay out of this jar and then put a few dry pieces in there. But before we do that, let's just make something fun real quick. So I'm just rolling with all my fingers, pressing down a little bit. If I press too hard and make too many finger marks, I can just roll a little lighter, press a little lighter. And it's good to get some experience with feeling how to change the shape of this under your fingers as you roll. So making it smoothly change from small to one end and big to the other is a really good practice. So I'm just going all the way down it. See, I'm getting a few little bumps and wrinkles in it, and that's okay. Not too worried about it. So I want to go from maybe 1/2 inch thick on one side, and then just depending on how much length you have room for, if the piece is not breaking, then try to make it a little longer. So there we go, nice long snake. And you don't have to make it perfect, and obviously you can make a snake out of this, but we're not doing that. So we're going to roll this up and turn it into a little snail shell, and then we're going to make a little snail. It's a fun and easy little thing to do. So as long as your clay is not cracking, you should be able to roll it up. But again, you're going to have to play with it a little bit and make sure that the clay isn't too soft or too dry. See, it's starting to crack a little bit there, but it seems to be rolling up okay. So I'm just rolling it up. This will also work with Play-Doh or even the oil-based clays. And it'll probably stick a little bit better if you have one of those clays. So there we go. And now the end, so you see why I wanted it to be smaller in the middle. Now a real snail shell isn't just a tube, a flat roll like this. This is more like a nautilus or a sea creature. So if you really want to do more of a snail shell, you can also wrap it, you know, like that, although, you know, you don't want it to look too gross, but you know, that's what snail shells do. They get from smaller to bigger and wrap around like that. So if you really want to, you could fill in that hole with a little bit of clay so that it doesn't fall apart. So I'm just going to grab another piece, push it there so that it doesn't move too much, and then I'm going to change the end to be an opening like a snail shell, and then we're going to stick a little snail body coming out, and that'll be that. It'll be a fun little project. So if you make it stand up like this, and if it's having trouble, you can add a little bit more into the middle. I'm just using the clay to smush. And if it's too dry, if this isn't working and joining, you can grab some of your slip or slightly wetter clay. That's a great chance to fill in gaps like that. Just see how sticky and messy it is, so you don't want to do too much of that. But it does work really well to fill in little bumps and cracks like this. You can just rub them right over. That clay had been sitting for a while, so it was a little drier than when it first comes out of a package. I can do something else maybe in a bit to show what that feels like. And then depending on how smooth you want to be, you could fill in all of that gap a little bit or not. Really depends on what you want it to look like, how smooth you want it to be. But it will, if you do switch between really dry and really wet clay and it goes to dry, you will see some cracks. So just be aware of that. It may, if it dries at different speeds, you can end up with a big crack between the wet and the solid clay parts. But this should work pretty well. And the other way around that is to do an overall spray of water or sprinkle of water. Oh, there you go. So there's a nice little snail shell or hermit crab shell. So you can make a little crab if you want out of this, but we're going to do a little, I don't know, let's see what happens. I'm not sure. So pressing on the table to make the table, make it a little flat. You can do a little drop. And there we go. So now let's add some pieces to it. So I'm trying to add this clay, but again, it's going to be dry clay on dry clay. It's just going to fall apart. So you do want to have a little bit of the sticky clay to help join it together. You could also mix a little of the sticky clay into the end before you form something, and then when you join it, it'll stick much better. Could have also saved a little bit of clay at the end there, but let's see what we can generate out of this. So I'm just going to make a nice little fun snail head just by tweaking little bits that come off. Maybe make a little face. This is where the tools can come in handy. Make it lift up a little bit. I know snails don't have eyes and faces, but if we're doing a little fun cartoon snail, we can do whatever we want. So if you want to make a fun little face, go ahead and make a fun little face. Well, let's make him a happy snail. So if you want to add little googly eyes, it's hard to pull a sphere out of a solid piece like that, so maybe make a couple little spheres in your hand and roll them into balls like that. I'm going to stick them on with some sticky clay. This might not work. Yeah, it's a little too sticky and a little too dry. That was not the greatest clay to use for making a small little part like that, but let's see what happens. I guess I say that a lot, but that is kind of what I'm doing. I don't always have this completely planned out. I'm just doing a few things, seeing what happens. Why not? Yeah, snails don't have faces for a reason. It's really creepy. So, you know, you may not want to do that quite while you're ahead, but kind of fun little cartoon face. A lot of stuff, remember, you can do when this starts to dry. So as it's drying, this clay gets sort of a leathery feel to it, and you can do things that are called like a burnish, where you can rub a metal or plastic tool against it and create more detail where there wasn't any detail. You can also smooth things out really well that way. But there we go, a fun little exercise. So I think we're going to stop there for this one. Maybe do some other ones. I'll be doing you know, little teddy bears and a couple animal things, some fun little projects that I think everybody will enjoy. And if you don't want to keep it, you can throw it in the jar and try again, right? Don't worry about it. If you don't get it right the first time, you can always try again. You're not wasting anything even. This is very easy clay to start out with and experiment with. Some fun things you can do. Let's see, we're almost, I'll try to make these about half an hour, so I think any longer than that might be too much. So we'll try a simple hand with what's left. This is way too dry, so you can see what happens though. If you just get the outside wet, then you just have a slimy outside. That's not really fun either. Let's see what we got with this. So we want to do a super quick hand just to get something going here for the last 5 minutes. I usually just press out of one piece. Very similar to what I did with the other one. Oof, this is really not the right. This really wants to crack, but I kind of like that its firmness is a little more than just regular out of the package, but you see how it just wants to crack on me, which is not great, but it has enough firmness that it's letting me smush, so I might be able to fix this. Okay, so first thing you do for a hand is you start out with what looks like a mitten. You want it to be shaped like that. Gotta mix some of this clay with it or it's just gonna fall apart. So the most important thing when you're starting a hand is to get the overall volume in the right places first before you put any slices in for fingers. You want to make sure you get your mitten correct, which is basically the thumb. And people forget that the thumb is really comes off and occupies quite a bit of the palm when you bend your hand, and it's a good place to start with a relaxed pose of the hand. Bend the fingers a little bit and just look at your hand and watch how it changes. The knuckles in the back of your hand are actually much higher up than this division here. There's a lot of subtlety to a hand that you don't think about unless you really start to observe. So it's a very good lesson to get yourself used to training your eye to see shapes and be on your way to all kinds of fun exercises and things to make. So you want to have some thickness to the palm, and it's okay to have a little extra on the palm and a little less on the fingers. And it's going to be like fingers that they're all together. And now cutting it apart, you got to find a tool at least. But if you don't have a tool and you only have even like a paintbrush end, you can do quite a bit with that. So I'm just going to press it with that really simply. So not exactly halfway, because the two small fingers are a little less, and I can even do a little digit work on the tips like that before starting. But essentially you just press through and you see how you've already almost got a hand. So then you just have to make sure you split them all the way. If the clay is not behaving, I mean, really it's just about balancing the water. So I'm going to go quickly now because we're almost out of time. So usually I just pinch a little bit to round the fingers. Get the tips of the fingers right. Check that they're the right thickness and the right volume. You can see how it's already looking pretty good. The rest can be done either with a tool or your finger. I usually measure out the distance and draw a few of the major lines to see that it's measured properly. And then even here, you want a little bit for each digit. If you end up with too much on a finger, you can always pluck the end off, change it, and that's really most of the inside. Just changing the shape of the tips, adding a little bit for knuckles, pinch a little bit for that part connecting the thumb and hand. Don't forget about this part around the thumb. And then usually I like to relax the fingers just a little bit, make it a little more interesting. And I'll try to keep this simpler. Usually I go a little more overboard with the hand here. But see, the back is quite rough. Another trick here that I usually do for the back of the knuckles is to just do a little pinch in between each finger and then press it down without going too far. You see how that sort of makes a knuckle shape. So pinching here. So again, I'm keeping the knuckle of the back of the hand up pretty high because there's that slope between the fingers that goes from the front to the back of the hand. The knuckle's actually back there. So really light pinch and press. Pinch, press, pinch, press. Done, done. Simple hand. Hands are fun. You can do a lot. It's a lot more complicated than you realize at first. and you can get a lot of really good practice just by doing hands a bunch of times. So there you go. That's about it for this lesson. Have fun out there, guys, and I'll see you soon. And smush it. Don't be attached. It's okay.